For so many policy analysts like yourself, they didn't expect what we saw from the CBN and what form of plan they're making. Can you relate that with what has happened to the cash reserve ratio, the CRR, and the Treasury single account policy? Is there a correlation between these two?
Now, in a situation in which you have a cyclical crisis, in which you are tending towards recession, we don't have a recession, but we have recessionary conditions. Because if you go into negative, the consequences on your economy is similar to if your growth rate declines. So if you're going from at 6.5% and your growth rate goes to 2.35%, you simulate recessionary conditions. Because that shows that some people are losing their jobs, some people are not producing as much as they were producing. So again, CBN's advice should be taken seriously. Now, so in those set of conditions, you need counter-cyclical policy to prevent a recession, to prevent a meltdown. So when things are drying up, you reflate, not suck out more. Now, much of our policy doesn't understand that dynamic. So while I totally support the TSA I have advocated for as far back as 2, 3, 4 years ago. So while I 100% support the TSA for reasons of transparency, accountability, dealing with corruption, and the fact that it contributes to better monetary policy management, there is more control of monetary supply.
Even
so I totally understand all the arguments for TSA, and I support it, and this is documented.
You don't think there's going to be a backlash?
However, the timing of sucking out liquidity from the system in a period in which you are having recessionary conditions is negative. And therefore, I thought that the pace of implementation should have been more pragmatic rather than ideological. Nevertheless, having done it, it's okay. The CBN now has instruments with which it can reflate the economy. As it now understands that the economy may be tipped into recession if you continue. So if anybody has read my column, I supported the bailout of states, not because I liked the bailout, but because I saw it as a form of fiscal stimulus, because it would be counter-cyclical policy that will inject liquidity into the states and contribute to output. One of the reasons why output is so down is because the consumption of civil servants in all the states of the country is down because they have not been paid. So even that was monetary policy, but even though the government didn't seem to view it in that light, they just thought they were bailing out the states. But so it was the right policy, given the recessionary conditions.
Do you think, sorry, Mark, but do you think the CBN is trying to also buy time here, going by the forex restriction that they have placed, seeing what they can get before they lift such restriction?
The CBN, I totally understand the CBN's conditions. I mean, I don't envy them. Your income has declined by 50, 60% in some periods. That's the only source of your income. You have, it seems, political leadership that wants exchange rates to be stable, and therefore you resort to administrative controls. And then you resort to appeals to patriotism. And when the central bank starts appealing for patriotism, instead of dealing with policy, you know that policy is wrong. So I think that, my view is that 3 months ago, on May 29, Nigeria may have been able to escape devaluing the currency further. Why? Because there was tremendous goodwill domestically and internationally. There was an eagerness of the international community to support Nigeria. If Nigeria had got policy right on day one, got a team in place to run the economy, a credible, respected team in place to run the economy, remove the subsidy, began to work on a draft new petroleum industry bill that would encourage investment in the upstream sector, did the right policies in trade and investment, leveraged the US visit of the president for economic purposes, rather than for help us turn loot, and then Boko Haram. So yeah, we could have said those things, those two things, loot, Boko Haram, which were basically the but if we had on that day, and we could have, because that was 2 months after inauguration, if we had a strong economic team canvassing investments in infrastructure, in power, in all of those things, and we went with a business delegation, and we understood that this was about economics as much as it was about security and corruption, and even the visit to France, and if we leveraged all of those positively, and policy was the international community was bullish about Nigeria based on the policies they saw, and the confidence that we were going to deal with corruption, we could have escaped
Mr.
devaluation. Today, we cannot escape a devaluation.
Mr. Bade, what you've talked about the role of government, the CBN and all of that. Let's look at the private sector and how we can come out of this situation we're in now.
The 2.35% growth we have now is from the private sector. Government itself is in recession. If you look at the GDP breakdown, one of the sectors in the recession is public administration. So that the reason we have by the way, oil and gas is in a big negative. So it declined by 7% or so. So it's not oil growth. The 2.35 you had in Q2 was because the private sector is still struggling to produce. Our growth today is non-oil, non-government. It's private sector led.
Okay.
So yes, but now the private sector is being squeezed. And
squeezed by policy?
Squeezed by first natural conditions, the decline in oil price, the lower availability of FX, the lower purchasing power generally in the economy as people are not paid, as contractors are not paid, teachers' salaries. So those are not the fault of anybody, even though, like I mentioned earlier, policy should have been counter-cyclical to nullify that. You know, if your water is too hot, you pour cold water in it to nullify. If it's too cold, you pour hot water in it. So that's how policy behaves in relation to cycles. You move in the opposite direction to balance it out. We have reinforced the decline through policy. Maybe mistakenly, maybe there's a shortage of understanding of economics around, even in the central bank. So the private sector is not the fault. But now, today, many people, like I said, manufacturing is in recession. That's private sector.
You say...
Those are people who can't get dollars to import their inputs. They would rather have a devaluation and get the inputs in, so at least they keep their workers and they keep their production, rather than have zero, in which now your national stability of your exchange rate is of no benefit to them. They will shut their factories.
What special methods, because you talk about that conversation that you had with the CBN and Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. We do know that they had their complaint with the president and he asked them to see the CBN and see what they can do for them. Did they profile any solutions to the problems manufacturers are going through?
I think like I said, it seems the CBN is playing to a decision that has already been made, that you should keep the exchange rate stable. And the president practically said so. In France, we've told the CBN that we want to work and all of that. So perhaps the CBN is also not acting with autonomy in respect of monetary policy. However, one thing I know for certain is that the solution to rationing dollars in a period of scarcity of dollars is not for some officials to sit down in an office and decide who gets the dollars and who doesn't get it. First of all, the Nigerian history is very clear on the consequences of that. What do you think will happen? I sit in my office, whether Federal Ministry of Finance, Federal Ministry of Commerce, or Central Bank, or in a bank's treasury. And all of these examples I use deliberately because all of them have been used before for periods of control of rationing dollars. When it was in the Federal Ministry of Commerce in the 80s under Shagari, the people there became very wealthy. When it was in the central bank, the people in CBN who are responsible for rationing FX became very wealthy. When it was bank treasurers rationing it in the 80s, after the licensing of banks, the bank treasurers became very wealthy. You have introduced a corrupt and untransparent method of allocating scarce resources. It is more rational to let the pricing mechanism, which is the only mechanism known to economics, when there's a dislocation between demand and supply, the mechanism that reorganizes it, that restores equilibrium, is the price. That's it's not nationalism. It's not patriotism.
You say that the policy.
Price.
You said something.
So the
about
price in this case is the exchange rate. Unfortunately,
you talked about.
Sorry, Mark, but if it's the exchange rate, by the time we have more demand for forex, don't you think that will lead ultimately to the devaluation of the naira?
Like I said earlier, we could have evaded devaluation 3-4 months ago based on sound policy. I don't think we can avoid it today, except oil suddenly goes back to $90, $100 per barrel, which I will urge us not to hope and pray for. Even if that miracle does happen, it means we've kicked a problem down the road and failed to resolve it. So those.
No, but some people would not agree with you. Some people will say that we do need that leverage right now to maneuver. Because if cash is currently tight, it's so much so that states are not able to pay salaries and they rely on a bailout, then we do need some amount of liquidity to ensure that whatever it is that we're planning
then
for the future,
recognize
we
the
can
cost. There's no problem. Let's recognize. So the costs are 1. Reserves is down to 30. Exchange rates at current levels. I predict oil prices at current levels. Exchange rates at current levels. I predict that in a year's time, maybe we'll have $15 billion in reserves and going downwards. And maybe I'm even optimistic, except CBN elongates the list of banned items from 41 to 80 or 100. So what will be the consequences? Your reserves are depleted. The users of foreign exchange begin to decline in output, so manufacturing goes into a big recession. Jobs are lost and all of that. So you see, economics is a trade-off. You choose what you want.
Are we not hiding behind the manufacturers here?
It's not just
the truth. Quite a number of people will say the truth is we're heavy consumers of imported finished products.
We should stop doing so.
What do we appeal to?
But right now, policy is subsidizing that behavior.
A whole lot to talk about here. Even a whole lot. The TSA, the Morgan Chase, so many things to talk about when we talk about Nigeria's economy. We do hope that, after the holiday, we should be having you back here, sincerely, to look at so many other issues here, in addition with other economists. We'd like to thank you for spending time with us this morning. Opemi Agbaje, he's an economist and a policy analyst and the Chief Executive Officer of RTC Advisory Services. Happy holiday.
Thank you very much.
Well, we'll take a moment. We'll return shortly. Stay with us.